You are listening to a podcast series, Asking Soulful Questions, by Sacred Art of Living. To learn more, visit sacredartofliving.org. Today's podcast is a part of a series called The Question of Belief.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Daryl Williams, your host for this podcast series called Soul-Size Questions. Once again, we are coming to you from three different locations. I'm in Dewey, Arizona, and Richard Groves, the founder and director of the Sacred Art of Living Center, is in Bend, Oregon. For this episode, we're joined by Rabbis Nadya and Victor Gross, who are in Boulder, Colorado. Today, we're going to lean into the question, whose God is right? And explore, among other things, how fundamentalism impacts the planet and the elusive idea of world peace. Now, Richard, you've known the rabbis for a number of years, so how about you kick off this discussion?
All right. Well, it was just a wonderful, blessed day when somehow at the Denver airport, the three of us sat and had a cup of coffee and some lunch and got to meet each other. I had heard about you both, and really ever since there's been a wonderful connection to our work at Sacred Art of Living, and you've been wonderful mentors in our Anam Cara apprenticeship training programs on the whole subject of aging to saging, and you've brought us the wisdom of Reb Zalman, who I'm sure you'll reference here if people don't know him. So I'm just grateful to have been connected and associated with you, and now in this podcast to explore some big questions.
Well, I want to say that the gratitude goes both ways. We've been so delighted to be a part of the Sacred Art of Living Anam Cara program, and the opportunity to get to know you, Richard, and so many wonderful people through the organization.
Yeah. I'd say for me, it's been transformative for me, primarily because, and we'll, I'm sure, get to it, when Reb Zalman taught his understanding of Deep Ecumenism, one of his arguments, which is contrary to generally accepted theology, was that you can't get all your vitamins from one source. And as a result of being in the Anam Cara, I learned a huge different source of transformational thought and practice. It was huge. And the expansiveness as a result of that has made me a different person as a result of it. It's been wonderful.
Wonderful to hear. And I think that maybe is a good place to start, because you've also brought aspects of deep roots of Judaism in the Christian tradition and in the Celtic tradition to us through your own practice and your deep commitment to Judaism. And so I'd like to just pause around that term there that, Victor, you mentioned, Deep Ecumenism. That may be a new term for some people, and I know it has a special meaning for you, and maybe you could define it for us.
Well, the term was coined by Reverend Fox, and we met him in the late 90s when we were rabbis in a congregation in Berkeley. And so we'd hang out with Matt Fox, and when we'd go over to his University of Creation Spirituality, he would invariably pick up the phone, put it on speaker, and call Reb Zalman. So we began to see the connectedness of people, of really giants in their own faith and work. And it was at the beginning of when Matt started his Cosmic Mass, which was just, I mean, a total blow mind for us to see this kind of work being done in an ecumenical way. And then in 1998, Rev Zalman, for 5 days at a retreat center in upstate New York, taught what we were sometimes refer to as his Torah of Deep Ecumenism. But to define it, I figured it would come up, and I always have it taken from Matt Fox's book, One River, Many Wells. He defines it this way, and I never like to go without his actual words because it's succinct and clear. He says, what is deep ecumenism? Meister Eckhart said, quote, divinity is an underground river that no one can stop and no one can dam up. So that's the beginning of it. Then Fox goes on and he said, there is one underground river, but there are many wells into that river. Many wells, but one river. We would make a grave mistake if we confused the well itself with flowing waters of the underground river. Many wells, one river. That's deep ecumenism. And it was profound because you can imagine it, you can picture it. And there you are, or there I am in a Jewish well, right next to a pagan well, a Taoist well. And we're all being watered by the divine river. And there's seepage going on between the different wells. So that's it. And that, for Nadya and me, that transformed our lives, that 5-day teaching. And then we had to look for an outlet, and several things came. Our long-term, we're still in deep relationship with a Lutheran church here in Boulder, and our work with Richard in Anam is the expressions that we get, not just from the teachings, but from the people who are in there, because they really, the first time we did this, I remember there were people from Europe, people from Japan, people from Australia, people from North America and Mexico. So it was an amazing experience for us, and it continues to be our guiding work.
So I'm gonna add one of the things that Rev Zalman added to Matt Fox's teachings on deep ecumenism was what's known as Rev Zalman's organismic model, right? So Rev Zalman, first of all, was a teacher of Gaian consciousness, right? The earth is a living, breathing body, Gaia. And he suggested that all of the religions, cultures, faith traditions on this earth were like organs of the body. And just as the organs in our bodies each have their own unique role and responsibility. So the heart can't do the job of the kidneys, and they can't do the job of the liver, et cetera, et cetera. So each has its own unique role in the body, but they each need all the other ones to be healthy so that they can continue to be healthy and do their role. And they have to work in some kind of association with each other, the giving and the taking and the flowing into and from. And that was another way that Rev Zalman expressed what deep ecumenism is, so that when we engage with people of other faith traditions, we each of us have our place in the world and our responsibility, our story and our unique contribution to the unfolding of humankind, the unfolding of all of creation, really. And at the same time, no one is more important than the other. We each need all of us to be doing our job so that the whole can be healthy and the world, Gaia, can continue to live and evolve.
It's like I said to you guys before, these always bring up thoughts for me. And I recently had a conversation with a friend who's pretty fundamentalist Christian, and it had brought up some controversy in a conversation I was in. And I was trying to say to this person, you know, I hope you understand, because you're convinced that your book is right, but there's all these other religions out there who have the same concept. And so I don't know how you can ever have any communication if you don't acknowledge that they have just as many valid beliefs as you might. And I think that's kind of, we wanted to get into this whole fundamentalist, like that. What I see as a common theme from anybody that's been through the Sacred Art of Living Center is this openness. But that's not the way it is in the world a lot, is it? And how do you guys look at that? And I don't know how we impact that kind of thing.
I wonder if part of it too is, even as you were both defining beautifully and subtly what Deep Ecumenism is, and clearly Matt Fox, Reb Zalman, helped dig deeper into that. It's different than a kind of sloppy ecumenical movement where we just kind of mush together. And I think sometimes what's threatening about that is, well, I guess I just won't have a belief anymore. We'll just come together, and there's some kind of, as I say, mix and match. And I think what I'm hearing, maybe you can respond to this, is Richard Rohr, another of our mentors, talks about our age is being called to drill many, many wells, going back to that same metaphor. But ultimately, also, for most people, there needs to be one 100-foot well somewhere. And that doesn't mean that it excludes the others. It means that it's a tap root into a tradition that I know deeply. And so when I explore the others, because this is porous and permeable, it actually deepens my own tradition. It doesn't threaten it somehow. Excellent. Would that be your impression?
Absolutely. I mean, when you engage with another, a person of a different spiritual tradition, for a true dialogue to exist, one has to start with commonality. After one discovers what is shared in common, and that's relatively easy because all the traditions have that humanistic commonality with it. Then you can talk about differences, and the differences are not in argument. The differences are what enriches each of the traditions. It's that vitamin that Reb Zalman talked about that may be missing from your own tradition. So it's one of the things that I got out of the beginning dialogue with the pastors in the Lutheran Church, and expanded over time, was that they began to see, as I began to see, the vitamins that each tradition needed to be able to be self-critical rather than defensive about one's tradition was a huge experience, because I didn't grow up that way. I grew up in a world that was basically a little more overt than subtle anti-Semitic. I heard the charge of having killed Christ, those types of things. And so the response in that community, in the Jewish community that I grew up in, which was a very small community, was superiority of being a Jew. They don't know it, but you're superior. All right? And that they really missed the boat. And that lasted, I'll tell you, that lasted until I got into rabbinical school, when I encountered my first great teacher, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And at that time, he was going over to the Vatican, negotiating the schema on the Jews that absolved Jews of the guilt for killing Jesus. So that, and I would talk to him about it when he'd come back, and he'd say, we're not ready for it. We Jews are not ready to receive that. Just know, and I didn't understand it at that time, I do now. He said, what the Christian world is doing, particularly the Catholic world, is an act of grace. And the Jews are receiving that act of grace, and we're not offering anything in return yet, but we will eventually. That was a huge moment for me.
And if I can also add to, in response to your question, particularly, Richard, when we engage in deep ecumenism, we have to know who we are. We have to be firmly rooted in our identity and our tradition in a way that relieves a person of that fear that they're going to become some kind of homogenized nothing or whatever. In the early years, when our synagogue, to be clear, shares space with a Lutheran church. When our community, our congregation was formed, we went looking. Churches often would rent to new Jewish congregations, would rent space, right? And when we stepped into this environment, the pastors met us with, we're not interested in renting, we're interested in sharing. And that opened the door to an amazing, and Rev Zalman was our mentor. He mentored the four of us. They are also a married couple, serving together at that time, and the two of us. And they were looking to share because they needed partners in keeping the building going initially, but then they discovered what sharing really meant from our perspective. And our two congregations were a little wary, right? We would get, from our congregation, are we going to have to do X, Y, Z with them? And they were hearing, what are you trying to turn us into? And what we have discovered over the years as we took baby steps and then some bigger steps, and to the point where now we can worship together. We do ecumenical services maybe 2 or 3 times a year, not too often, but we'll do an ecumenical service. And we attend Christmas Eve to hold space and bless them. And they come to us on the high holidays. There's been exchange, we study together, we do good works in the world. But what has happened, and which actually Pastor Linda Daniels-Block was one of the first who welcomed us into this relationship. She at one point made a comment in public, and she said something to the extent of, make no mistake, in this relationship, the Jewish congregation has become more profoundly Jewish, and the Lutheran congregation has become more profoundly Lutheran. And what we've learned from each other and with each other, and the way that we have, all of us have grown, and our boundaries have become permeable, our fields are expanded, and we're all enriched by the relationship. And we're still very profoundly identified in our own tradition.
I think that's a good example. This isn't just conceptual. You've experienced it. You get a chance to embody it. And I see us coming close to the end of this first segment. And I just thought setting up the second segment, which is to get into the question, whose God is right? I think the one thing that we would share in common, that Jews and Lutherans and Catholics would share in common, is this creed of the one God, of monotheism. And I just wanted to end this by saying that was a big step for me to discover through my Hebrew or Psalms teacher the depth of richness that I was not getting in my Catholic upbringing. But it was really in India, teaching there, that I encountered something so foreign. And I was raised thinking, oh gosh, India, you don't go into polytheism, it's going to be dangerous. And that was a childhood script. And I ran into Father B. Griffiths, who was a great English Benedictine teacher, and he created an ashram, a monastery, where he would bring people together from East and West. And he would always start by holding up his hand and would say, you know, on the tips of the fingers, we are Jew, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Buddhist. But here in the center, in the palm, we find something that holds us all together. And just that simple image for me was an encouragement to realize that this was not kind of a false syncretism where we mushed together, but in fact, we went down into a source that was in some ways the living waters underneath all of our traditions and our wells. And then I just noticed, there was a whole exploration, as Victor, you said, of a world that enriched me that I was totally unfamiliar with. How the Vedas and those beautiful scriptures, so ancient, in fact, weren't in opposition to. There was something there that could enrich my own belief as well. So,
yeah,
that's beautiful. I like that image of the hand. I'm going to use it. Thank you. With that confusion.
It's a good one. I think Bede would be. I think he would be honored.
I think we're off to a great start, and I really look forward to seeing where this discussion takes us. Please stay tuned for the next episode where we dive even further into this idea of whose God is right.
We would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Question of Belief. For more information about our entire podcast library, Asking Soulful Questions, visit our website at sacredartofliving.org.